Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Empowered Spirituality Podcast. I'm joined with Kristen Ciccolini. Hi, Kristen. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. But before we get into the episode, I'm going to pull a quick card from the Divine Feminine Oracle deck by Megan Watterson. And so when I pull a card at the beginning of the episode, it could be for me or for you, or it could be for anyone listening, and oftentimes we kind of come back to that theme during the episode. So I'm just thinking about what needs to come through for me or you or anyone listening. Ooh, I pulled Mary Magdalene, which I love. Her little affirmation is, I am the bridge between heaven and earth. I am fully human and fully divine.
I love that. That's a perfect card.
Too. I know. And she's such a rebel, and people thought she was like this awful person. But really, she was this like really divine, awesome female. So I feel like that's perfect for our talk today.
That is perfect. I like it.
I know. So yeah, Kristen, how are you doing?
I'm okay. It's a pandemic. That made me think of something. I went to the doctor yesterday and she was asking, how's your mental health? How's your stress levels? And I'm like, it's pandemic. And she's like, oh, that's what we call COVID good. I'm like, oh, that's bad that we have like a whole new standard, but
yeah,
but I'm okay. I'm still laughing.
Yeah, right. I tend to laugh more when I'm uncomfortable or sad. So
true. Okay. That could be a whole other way to look at this. Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes I forget that we're still in a pandemic and I'm like, oh yeah, no wonder I'm really fatigued and having a hard time like focusing. It's because we're in a pandemic still.
Yeah. It's hard. I see people still saying things like, still see people saying things like, I've lost 2 years of my life, or I wish I had my life back, but like your life is still happening. It's still going on. And so I feel like a lot of people get so caught up in the fact that we're still in a pandemic. And then also there's this whole opposite view of it where it's like, no, you can actually live your life. And it sounds like maybe that's what you're doing if you're forgetting about that,
Oh yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I feel like it like comes back to me in waves and chunks.
Yeah. I mean, you can embrace the fact that your life is still happening and you still have some semblance of control.
Oh yeah, that's such a cool way to look at it, which is why I wanted you on the podcast. I love the way that you look at things. I love your podcast and I love all the content that you post on Instagram. So I'm just so excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could maybe start by saying what you do.
What I do. So I am a functional nutritionist. I own Good Witch Kitchen. There I share a lot of education on menstrual health. That's my specialty. I work with people on their hormone imbalances and also on, chronic dieting and the emotional eating and the relationship to food. So those are the main things that I focus on. I find both of those can be very intertwined sometimes. So yeah, I do nutrition coaching. I teach online courses and I also host the Lunar Body podcast.
Oh, and it's so good. I literally send that podcast to every new client I have because you explain things in such a beautiful way.
That's amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's all this podcast is going to be, is me just showering you with compliments.
Please. Okay. That's my love language. I love being here.
That's so cool though. And I love that you blend menstrual health with kind of like the more traditional aspects of health that we think of. And I'm curious what got you interested or got you started on that path.
So it's I'll try to make it short. So before I was in nutrition, before I changed careers and I started working as a nutritionist, I had a career in marketing, specifically social media marketing. And it was a 24/7 job. I had no life. Basically, I had no work-life balance. And as someone who dealt with depression my whole life, it really exacerbated all that. So at one point I realized, like, these people do not care about me. They only care about their bottom line. So I'm going to do my work, and then my personal time is my personal time, and I will look out for myself. And at the time in Boston, there were a lot of free classes happening around town, a lot of free workouts. So I was getting involved in all that, and I started to commit to fitness and paying attention to what I was eating. And shocking, I started to feel better. And I realized, I mean, it wasn't until then, it might sound silly, but I realized then that there was such a powerful connection between food and how I was feeling, my mood, my physical well-being. And I was so fascinated about how that all worked. And eventually I stumbled upon the Academy of Culinary Nutrition. And I wasn't even really thinking of going into nutrition or changing careers at the time, but reading through that course material, I started to see what was possible and what I could learn and what I could offer. And so in 2016, I graduated from that program, and then I started my business in 2017. And so how I got into menstrual health was that, the first couple years of my business, I was working with all these different people. I didn't really have a specialty. I was just, anyone and everyone, I'll help you, just very generic, which was fine because we all have to, that's how you learn, that's how you figure out what you like. And I noticed I was trying to figure out how I could narrow down in my business. What do I want to focus on? And so I got all my notes together from all of my clients that I had had and was trying to pick out like their main concerns. And I realized that their main concerns were not, well, so they almost all of them had period problems, or some sort of cycle related problem, but they were not the main concerns that they came to me for, which I thought was super interesting. So I'm realizing, like, okay, you have enough, it's enough of a problem for you that you mention it, that it's affecting your work, it's affecting your social life, but it's not enough that you're coming to me for this. It's not enough that you're like, no, this is something that I need to focus on. It's secondary or not even on the radar, just because we're taught that it's just an inevitable part of life that these are going to be problems that we're going to have to deal with. And I just found that so interesting. And so I wanted to know why is this happening? Why does everyone just accept it? And naturally that led me down the path of the patriarchy. Fuck the patriarchy. Can I swear? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can.
Fuck the patriarchy. That's a lot of what I talk about. But yeah, it just brought me down this whole road where I just got so passionate about education around this, because we don't receive this type of education in school. And there's just a whole systemic issue of why we don't receive that education and why we aren't taken seriously, and why we don't know anything about our bodies, why we think that we are just supposed to accept that our natural function in our body is supposed to affect our work life, affect our personal life, affect so many different aspects of our life, and it doesn't have to be that way. So long story short, that's how I got there.
Wow. And I had the same kind of moment where when I learned that we have four-ish different cycles if we're not on hormonal birth control, where we're like 4 different people in a month, and like we have 4 different strengths and needs, or not 4 different needs, but 4 different sets of needs. Like, it just felt like, how have I not known this, and how are we not taught this? It feels absolutely crazy that we have this power and this like ability, and we're not taught anything about it.
Yeah. I have so many people that they hear about this stuff and they're like, what? Like even after, I get people who are beyond their menstrual years and menopause, and they email me like, wow, I really wish I knew this stuff a lot sooner. And some of the things that you learn can still be applied in menopause years, but it would be a lot nicer if years before you didn't have to deal with all of these symptoms and all of these disruptions.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What are the maybe common signs or imbalances that you were seeing in your clients?
So I would see a lot of low energy. So that was really big. I work with a lot of clients who are type A and who are really just, go, go, go all the time.
Yeah.
And our culture, our work culture really encourages that.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, we have 4 different phases in our cycle. We have 4 different sort of sets of needs. Things are changing throughout the month. And when we resist the cycle, then those types of symptoms can come on. The low energy and fatigue, you're feeling so depleted. Cramps, that's one big thing that a lot of people had. Some people were out of commission on the couch. They had to take time off from work because they were in so much pain. So there's that. There's, hormonal acne. There are, also things related to nutrient deficiencies, which is something we can talk about with birth control, because I know you want to discuss that. But there's a wide range of symptoms for hormone imbalance, but I would say the number one thing that I see is the low energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so interesting. And before we kind of launch onto the menstrual side, which I want to spend a lot of time talking about, I was wondering if you could go back and say, you were talking about when you started eating for your body, you noticed that your mental and emotional health improved. And I feel like a lot of us are taught to eat well so that we look good or that we're like thin and fit. But actually the way that we eat and the way that we live really impact our mental health as well. So I was wondering if you could briefly touch on that before we continue.
Yeah. And I will say that I was definitely very steeped in that when I was going through that. The whole diet culture. I mean, at the time I was trying to lose weight and I was trying to work on my physical appearance too. It wasn't until, a couple of years ago, at least, that I started realizing that that was not the way, that I wanted to work in a different way. I started to learn more about health at every size and intuitive eating, and started incorporating that. And I just could not turn back after that. After, you can't unlearn some things. So I was definitely, I will be transparent about that was the main focus for me. But then I realized that it had all these other benefits. And for depression, something like that I've been dealing with my whole life, for that cloud to lift. I mean, I still deal with it now and then. But I also now have the tools to take care of myself at those times. But then to see such a drastic shift in that mental health aspect, I was like, holy shit. How did I not know this? You grow up and you hear that, eat your vegetables, it'll make you healthy. You don't think about why or what exactly it's going to do for you. And it does seem silly maybe now, after we're so embedded, or the wellness culture is like so embedded in us, that food can help you. At the time, I just never really connected it. I never really thought about it. And so when I experienced that shift for myself, it was just so life-changing. And I wanted to tell everyone. I was that annoying person who was like, oh my God, you have to eat this way because it'll change your depression. It'll change your anxiety. I've since learned not to do that. But when you're excited about something, you just want to tell everyone.
Oh, I get that. That's why I became a coach, because I was like, I can't keep doing this to my friends. Like, people have to come to me now.
Yeah. Smart.
Yeah, but I know it's so true that we often enter into these spaces with the idea of losing weight, and with losing weight and that intention, which is okay. It's okay to want to lose weight if that's kind of where someone's at. But you talk a lot about ditching diet culture, and you talk a lot about that on your podcast, which I love. Could you touch on why ditching diet culture is so important?
Yes. So if you don't know what diet culture means, diet culture really is just the focus on thinness as the ultimate picture of health, focusing on weight loss, things like counting calories, body talk. You hear it all the time. It's just, we're so inundated with diet culture messaging. And once you are able to identify it, you will see just how bad it is. You will see how many messages you're getting throughout the day, just like things in passing that friends say, or even just on TV, like little comments that a character will make in a TV show, or even the advertisements that you see. Obviously we see like workout programs, or God forbid, if you ever, were sick one day home from school, and like all of a sudden the infomercials were on, and because there was nothing else on TV, and it's like weight loss pills, you know.
Yeah.
And it's so normalized. It's so normalized. It's so normalized to see, like on a magazine cover, Kourtney Kardashian after her third baby in a bikini, and
Yeah.
she
How
got
did she do
surgery,
it?
but yeah, how did she do it?
Yeah.
3 weeks, so it's things like that where it's just so normal in our culture. We don't think of it as diet culture. We think of it as like, oh yeah, what, like that's completely normal that we talk about that. It's completely normal that this is something that a client told me once. Around Valentine's Day, there was a lot of chocolate in the office. She said that her coworkers were unwrapping the chocolates, sniffing them, and then throwing them away so that they could try to experience the chocolate without the calories, which is the saddest thing. Like I don't mean to pass judgment on that, but that is sad. Come on, just eat the chocolate. Let yourself experience that pleasure, because food is meant to be pleasurable. There's so much pleasure to be found in food. And I think that's something that is taken away from us with diet culture, is that we're taught that we can't trust ourselves and trust that the things we like can be good for us, and that we can enjoy the things that we like in an appropriate amount for us. And by appropriate, I mean not like a correct amount that you should be eating, but more like what feels good in your body. How much of it feels good in your body? Is it making you feel the way that you want to feel? So I find that when we start to allow ourselves permission around the types of foods that we find pleasurable, that we typically put as off limits, there's a lot of resistance around that. There's a lot of fear. And it is hard. It's hard because you are so focused on restricting. You're on one end of the spectrum, that to allow yourself to enjoy foods, to have pleasure around food, you're going to go crazy. You're going to go on the opposite side of the spectrum, and you are going to eat the whole package of Oreos or whatever it is that you choose for that food, but it's a pendulum swinging from one side to another. And eventually, once you allow yourself that permission, once you start to feel a sense of safety around the food rather than panic, because when we have access to foods that we typically have off limits, it's like, oh, I have to eat it all now because I don't know when I'm going to allow myself to have this again.
Yeah,
So
totally.
And that instills a state of stress and panic and fear. So when we feel that we are safe around those foods, that food is always going to be there for me when I want it, then that's when the pendulum starts to even out, and we can start to feel a little bit more calm around food and just have a more relaxed relationship. I don't know if that answered your question. I feel like I just kind of rambled.
No, that was perfect. And so is that something that you see a lot, that the pendulum will swing the other way and then it'll slowly kind of find a middle ground?
Yeah, so it's something that we definitely talk about beforehand, just to prepare, because when you go into that other direction, it can be scary. It can feel like I can never trust myself. You start to tell these stories to yourself that I can't control myself around this food, when really it's just, you got to trust in the process, and you have to, again, allow yourself to start to feel safe around those foods. And there's another thing that I talk about with clients, where it's checking in with yourself before you eat and thinking about your hunger level and whether you are meal hungry versus snack hungry. And so this is not my concept. This is from the authors of Intuitive Eating. But when I read this and when I share this with clients, it's like a light bulb moment. It puts things into such perspective. It's such a shift. So when you think about it that way, for instance, say you are meal hungry and you decide you want chocolate, which, when you do that, when you make that decision beforehand, that's your decision, and you go with it, and you deal with it. And if you go into it saying you're meal hungry, but you decide to eat a snack instead, you're going to need a meal's worth of that chocolate to feel satisfied, because your hunger level is such that you are going to need that amount of food to feel satisfied. But if you aren't checking in with yourself and you don't know that that's your hunger level, you're going to tell yourself, oh, I can't control myself around chocolate. This is what happens every time I eat chocolate. I just eat the whole thing, So checking in with yourself is really important. Again, I lost your original question. But I know that that's the big thing that we talk about with clients is checking in and trying to shift that perspective, because there is a lot of fear around that permission around food.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you said was self-trust. And I feel like that relates to both menstrual health and also eating and also everything, because we're really taught that we cannot trust ourselves from a very early age. And so is a lot of your work kind of deprogramming that and tapping into the fact that we can trust ourselves and that we are trustworthy?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of that work is really working on your intuition. Sorry about that. Yeah, so a lot of the work that we do is focused on intuition, and a lot of intuition is being able to trust yourself and getting back into that that mindset that, you know, your body signals are true, that the signals that you're getting about your hunger, about your fullness, about your satisfaction, it's all coming from within you, and that is the truth, versus what like a meal plan says you should be eating, what the serving size is versus what you actually want to eat. Or, you know, the way I work as a nutritionist, I don't like to give people, like I'll help with recipes and, you know, just giving people ideas of things to eat, but I will never give you a list of foods that is like, these are the only things that you can eat, you know, because that's not helpful. But that is a lot of what people want. Some people will come to me and be like, I need you to tell me exactly what to eat and when. And that doesn't help you. Like, I don't know your body. I can help guide you to learn yourself about your body, to become the expert in your own body. I can help guide you with that, but only you know how you feel in your body, and only you can tell me if it's working for you. It's not going to be me saying this has to work for you, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful approach. And I'd love to maybe transition into menstrual health. But just thank you so much for giving that insight on intuitive eating and also what that means. Because I feel like we hear intuitive eating and we're like, cool, but like, how do I do that? And so I love that you just gave us some very actionable steps that we can take to connect with our intuition when we're eating.
Yeah. And I also find that with intuitive eating, some of the struggle with getting started is not knowing how to connect to your intuition. And that's where I bring in like the witchy stuff and like the spiritual aspect, because there's the very practical side of connecting to your intuition through your body signals, through your hunger and fullness signals. But then we can also hone that skill in other areas like meditating and tarot and journaling and things like that. So the way I work tends to encompass all of that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's very cool that you blend practical information and knowledge with also spiritual practices. I love that.
Yes. Practical and the mystical. That's what I like to say.
Oh, I love that. That's funny. Not funny, but that's on my website. That's why I said that's funny. Not the fact that you say that's funny. But yeah, transitioning to menstrual health. I know we mentioned the 4 phases earlier, but I was wondering if you could maybe give us a rundown of those 4 phases.
Yes, of course. So there are 4 phases to the menstrual cycle, like you said. Clinically, there are 2 main phases. So the follicular phase is the first half of your cycle, and then the luteal phase is the second half. So those halves, clinically, you're not going to have people telling you that there's 4 phases, because those are the main halves. And then those halves are separated by ovulation and menstruation. But the way that you are learning to see it, and the way that a lot of people are talking about it now, and which I love talking about it too, is looking at it as their own separate phases, because they all carry with them such definitive energies. So the follicular phase, that's the beginning, is when estrogen starts to build in the body. Your energy is also building, and this is associated with the waxing moon phase. So you can think of it as, you know, your light growing. And estrogen is low, but it gradually rises over time. It helps to thicken the lining of the uterus to prepare for possible pregnancy. And then the follicular phase leads up to ovulation. So when estrogen hits its peak, that signals to the brain to tell the body to ovulate, essentially. And an egg releases from its follicle, which is located on the ovary, and it travels to the fallopian tube, where it sits for up to 24 hours. So that is when you are fertile, is when ovulation is occurring in the 5 days prior to that. So I know we're taught that you can get
Yeah.
pregnant at any time in your cycle, but it's actually just like a 6-day window.
Yeah.
So yeah, so ovulation, the egg is only viable for up to 24 hours. And ovulation is a very high energy time. It's the best time. It's associated with a full moon. So lots of energy, social activity, motivation, high libido as well, because your testosterone is high too. So it's a really fun social time. So if you ever notice that there are times in your cycle where you just are like texting all your friends, you're on social media, you're all over the place, you're making plans. And then like a week later, you're like, shit, why did I do all that? I don't want to do anything that I agreed to. So you're probably ovulating. But then after ovulation, we move into the luteal phase. So more of the waning moon energy. So it starts out with that high energy, and then it gradually decreases over time. Same with the estrogen. Progesterone becomes more of the dominant hormone in this phase. So that is a hormone that's more calming, warming. It's more of an internal focus, mood-wise. And then if you don't get pregnant at this time, then eventually the lining of the uterus will get ready to shed. And then your hormones will start to decline, both progesterone and estrogen. And the luteal phase is where PMS symptoms will pop up if there's a hormone imbalance, because it is the time before your period. And then when hormones are at their lowest, then the menstrual phase begins with your period. You know how that goes. You know how you feel at that time. It's very internal. This is the new moon phase. So I like to look at it as like a bridge phase. It's the end and the beginning of a cycle. It's a quiet, restful phase that's all about release and introspection. And it's also a very intuitive time too. So yeah, so those are the 4 phases and their general type of energies.
Oh, thank you. And I love that you correlated every phase with a phase of the moon. And your podcast is called the Lunar Body?
Yes, the Lunar Body, yeah.
Lunar Body, okay. How did you make that link between moon and that menstrual cycle phase?
So it's not something that I personally came up with. A lot of people I've read, teachers that I've had have connected this in the past, and it's a very mirrored cycle. So the lunar cycle is roughly 28 days and the menstrual cycle roughly 28 days. And that's something we can talk about is regular cycles. It does not have to be 28 days. So if you are shorter or longer than that, it is not necessarily an issue. So that's something I come upon with people as well, as like, oh, my cycle is it's not 28 days. Is something wrong with me? No, not necessarily, so that's something to think about. But yeah, so the lunar cycle and the menstrual cycle are really, they align really well, especially with the energies. The length and the energies are really the main reason why we use it.
I love that. And I feel like maybe we can touch on this. When I was on hormonal birth control, that's when I first heard about all this. And I was like, oh, cool. And I actually didn't know that when you're on hormonal birth control, you don't have a real period.
Yeah.
And someone had to like pop that bubble for me and be like, yeah, that's cool. But like, that's not really for you because you don't even like have a period. And I was like, what is this thing I'm having every month then? Yeah. So can you tell us maybe the difference between a cycle where you're not on hormonal contraceptive and one where you are?
Yeah. So when you are not on birth control, you have a natural period, like exactly what I just explained, those hormonal fluctuations. What will typically happen is you notice right before ovulation, you may notice some discharge or cervical mucus in your underwear. That's how you know ovulation's oncoming. That's not something you typically experience with hormonal birth control, because what that does is it suppresses the communication between your brain and your ovaries. So there isn't really a natural cycle that's happening. You're not going to have the same hormonal fluctuations. So the bleed that you have at the end of a birth control cycle is a withdrawal bleed, because that final week is typically sugar pills, or, like the placebo pills, or just lower dose. So that withdrawal, those low hormones or no hormones, is what's going to trigger bleeding. And it's not, you're not shedding anything necessarily. So it is different and you don't experience the same types of fluctuations, though you can still have different energies. So you can still, I wouldn't say that none of this is like that the stuff isn't for you if you're on birth control, but you can just follow the lunar phases and have that kind of rhythm.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of alluding to, was that that was a really nice way for me to get into my spirituality in general, was checking out the lunar phases. And then two, when I wanted that kind of cyclical monthly energy, it was really nice to be able to tap into the moon cycles to kind of still feel like I was connected to that in my body as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so part of what you do with your classes is you incorporate spirituality into your cycle syncing. What does that look like for you to blend the two?
It's a lot of fun because I feel like it's a different aspect of cycle syncing that we don't see often. Because a lot of cycle syncing is about food. I mean, I'm a nutritionist. Obviously, I incorporate food aspect into it, but it's a lot about like food and fitness. And so I like to go a little further and go into our spiritual activities. And I actually did a podcast episode recently about energetic hygiene practices for your cycle. So like cycle digital hygiene. So things like that. And yeah, so part of that conversation was about not just like deleting apps and unfollowing people, which can be a spiritual experience if you want it to be. But yeah, that was part of the conversation, is like making it spiritual. So also when you're removing certain things from your phone or your computer, with your devices, whatever, doing a cord cutting spell, maybe you're trying to separate yourself from a certain person online, or so it's certain things like that where we can make things more magical. That's the question I like to ask when it comes to the work that I do, is how do I make this a little bit more magical? So the cycle syncing activities, I mean, of course, there are all the practical things that have to do with, food and fitness and work life and, all the other things going on in your life, but also the different practices that we can incorporate based on our energies. So maybe at the new moon phase, it's more about meditation and setting intentions. And maybe at the full moon phase, maybe you get together with your coven and you do a ritual, because it's more of a social time. So it can look any way that you want it to. But I do have in my course, I do have a lot of recommendations for tarot spreads at certain times. I also have recommendations for different self-care rituals. And so I try to offer something at each phase that sort of aligns with the energy that you're experiencing at that time.
Oh, that's so cool. I really love that approach to it. And I love kind of tailoring your introversion and extroversion with the phases as well. And kind of like gathering for a spiritual practice versus like being alone. And I feel like there's even self-trust in that as well, that I feel like I'm starting like 5 different topics. But there is like self-trust in kind of the setting of boundaries too, of like when it's my new moon time, whether it's the new moon or menstrual, like I'm going to set boundaries and not go out, and I'm going to trust myself that that's okay for me, or I'm going to trust myself that I do want to be out and that I'm going to have a fun time. Do you find that there's any like resistance, I guess, to leaning into the phases or the cycles, if that makes sense?
Not necessarily. I find that more people are excited to embrace it, and because it gives them an excuse to be, I don't think it's selfish, but that's the word that they use sometimes, is like, this is permission for me to be selfish, for me to put my needs first, which, as women, or that's my clients are women, we're socialized to not put ourselves first. And so it's like that relief, like, oh, I don't have to go out if I don't want to, or or I can decide to schedule something at a time that works for me versus just saying yes because, oh, they asked, I have to do it then, rather than, trying to negotiate a little bit. And of course, not every single thing that you do and plan can align with your cycle, as amazing as that would be. But we do what we can so that those times where we aren't able to be as flexible, they don't impact us as much.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And so cool that a lot of your clients are like, hell yeah, this is like exciting. And I feel like it's also like a feeling of coming home to yourself, which is what I felt too when I realized that was going on in me. I was like, oh wow, like I'm
Yeah.
coming back to my true nature with this.
Yeah. And I mean, I am very much an introvert. So this kind of work for me is just like a dream. Like, oh, I can just be alone and focus on myself. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool. Oh, and I wanted to, this is changing topics a little bit, which by the way, I'm usually like more collected. I'm just so excited to talk to you. So I feel like I'm like, but I wanted to talk about the experience of going off hormonal contraceptive and kind of what to expect in that process. Because I know I even have clients as well that are like, oh my gosh, like this is awful. My body hates me. But it's just a process of coming off, really.
Yeah. So coming off birth control is a really big topic, and it varies so much from person to person. Some people have no problems at all. Other people experience a wide range of symptoms. So it depends on multiple things. So it depends on your health status before you started taking birth control. It depends on how long you've been on birth control. It depends on your lifestyle, your diet, your physical activity, your stress levels. There's so many different things that can impact how that transition is going to go. So not everyone is going to experience the same exact thing. So I just want to state that up front. And I mentioned health status prior to birth control because often people are prescribed the pill to cope with symptoms of a hormone imbalance. So cramps, acne, heavy bleeding, whatever it is. But birth control doesn't cure the problem. It does, like I mentioned, it interrupts the communication between your brain and your ovaries. So it basically puts a pause. It's like pressing the pause button on your natural cycle. So the symptoms might stop, but it's because you've disrupted that communication. It's not because you address the root cause. It doesn't address why you were experiencing those symptoms in the first place. So it is very possible that when you come off birth control, your symptoms that you were experiencing before may come back. And then the length that you've been on birth control, that's definitely a factor, as well as how that transition is going to go. So one main thing to talk about there is the pill is associated with multiple nutrient deficiencies. So if you don't regularly get your levels checked at your doctor's appointment, if you're not on top of your status there, you may have some symptoms stemming from that potential issue. So that's something to think about. And then when you do get off birth control, it's going to take some time for your cycle to regulate. And again, this is different for everyone. Some people can start their period normally right away. If you went on the pill quite young, though, it may not return very quickly, because if you went on it young, your ovaries may not have had the chance to fully develop before your brain stopped communicating with them. So it could take a while for it to come back. Personally, for me, I came off birth control. I went off after about 14 years, and it took my cycle about a full year to become regular and predictable. And in that time, my big symptom was hair loss. So that's something that you might deal with. And it's a symptom of mineral deficiency. So that, just FYI, like there are a wide range of things that could happen. So if you are preparing to go off the pill, I do recommend getting your nutrient levels checked. And when you have your test back, you can create your own protocol from there. So rather than going straight to supplementation, I always prefer to go for food first. It's a more gentle way to go, and obviously very nourishing. And I could give you a list of nutrients to focus on, but I prefer that you test instead of guess. So I could tell you like, okay, these are all the things that might be wrong, but I don't want you to take that list and, go to the store and buy all the supplements, because that could be a total waste of money for you. You might not even need those things. So when in doubt, test, don't guess. So when you get your results, you can see which nutrients are low, which nutrients may need some attention. And then you find foods with those nutrients to incorporate into your diet. So that's how I like to go about it. And also it's, I think, more empowering for you, and if rather than me telling you like, these are all the things you need to do. Like I certainly can help you with it,
Yeah.
but it's more empowering to, take it into your own hands and get that test and, decide from there rather than me just telling you, take this stuff. So I would try to do this 2 to 3 months before you plan to come off birth control. So get tested, start to address any of those imbalances with food. I mean, depending on the severity of an imbalance, if there is one, you may need to supplement. That's something you talk to your doctor about. But I would start whatever it is, whatever protocol you're on, 2 to 3 months before you plan to do this. So you can start to correct some of those imbalances before you start to transition off. And another thing you might want to look into is seed cycling, which is another gentle, supportive way to use food for hormone balance. So that's something that's been helpful for my clients in the past. And I know that this all, I mean, I know I'm rambling, but I know this all doesn't sound great. Like coming off birth control is going to be this awful thing. That is not necessarily going to be the case. But even if you do experience symptoms as you transition off, just try to keep in mind that you are giving yourself a chance to learn and understand how your body naturally functions. And that is really, I find it very exciting. Maybe not everyone's such a nerd about it as I am, but I think it's really exciting. And I think it's such a gift. So just try to keep that in mind.
Oh, I love that. And it's so true that not everyone's experiences are the same. And even if your symptoms are pretty rough and rocky, they're not going to be like that forever, probably.
Right.
And I love that you said that's an opportunity to kind of learn more about ourselves. I love that approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Doing all the work that we do with cycle syncing is such a great opportunity to really get to know yourself. And it's so empowering. And I have found that it has given me so much strength and confidence in myself, not just in terms of physical health, where you can be a better advocate for yourself at the doctor's office, which is amazing. And that could be a huge part of your life, especially if you're someone who deals with a chronic illness or disability. But, just getting to know yourself on a spiritual level too. It's just, there's so much in there. It is such a gift. I could talk about this all day.
Me too. And so it sounds like what I love is that this is a never-ending journey. There's always more things to learn and find out about yourself and about your body. But if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, I want to get into this, but where the heck do I start? Where would be like a good starting point to kind of learning about your cycle?
So I always tell people the easiest place to start is to start tracking your cycle. It doesn't have to be on an app. It doesn't have to be, you don't need anything. You just need pen and paper at the very least. What I use is my Many Moons planner. Do I have it? Yeah, it's in my desk. Let me pull it out and show you. I use this as more of a journal. And if anyone's listening to this and they know me, they know I've talked about this a million times. But so this is, the month at a glance, like in the beginning of the months.
Oh yeah.
That's where I like to write down, like you'll see this planner has the moon phase already in there. Which is really helpful, but you can write down the moon phase if you find that's relevant to what you're tracking. I like to put down the day of my cycle and then write down just one word for how I'm feeling that day. So that way I can see, like, I also use like each day to just write down like the main things that happen that day as like a little mini journal. But this way I can look back and see, I can look at the whole month and see like, okay, when I'm around the full moon or when I'm ovulating, I tend to feel this way. Or on day 23, I'm like really not great being around people, So you can start to see patterns over time, even with just writing down one word for how you feel for the day. So if you want to start somewhere and you feel like, all the apps are too overwhelming or, just write down how you feel. I mean, you can also track like the main thing, like how long your period is and things like that. But I would say to start getting to know your body a little bit better and to start getting to know your rhythms a little bit better. That's a good way to start tracking, is writing down the one word for the day. And it doesn't have to be just one word. It can be whatever you want.
Yeah. That's neat. And I like that you're doing that in a way that you can see it all at once. Because I've actually done it in apps, and I feel like writing it down sticks with me better. But I've done it where it's like spread out over all the pages, and it's kind of like hard to look at a glance. So I like that you put it all on 1 month.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I use an app as well for, the more practical stuff, but this I like to do for the energy and just seeing patterns as we go.
Cool. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well, we're almost at the top of the hour, which is so sad because I could talk to you for another 5.
Yeah, this is great.
But is there anything that we didn't touch on that you really want to make sure that we cover?
I think we talked about it all. I mean, periods, cycle syncing, witchcraft, all the good stuff,
Yeah, all the necessities. So at the end of every episode, I like to ask my guests to come up with a resource or a challenge to send our listeners home with. So yeah, what should we do this week?
Well, a challenge could be doing what I just said, is writing down how you feel every day. But I have 2 books, 2 resources for you. So this one is, The Many Moons Planner, same author, Sarah. I love her. She's got a great podcast, the Moonbeaming podcast. I'm a stan for her. So this is her moon book. This will give you a ton of ideas for spiritual or rituals, things to do around all of the lunar phases. So it's called the Moon Book, Lunar Magic to Change Your Life. And it is such a fantastic resource if you're looking for the more spiritual aspect of cycle syncing. She doesn't necessarily talk about the menstrual cycle in here, but I think paired with this book, this could be like your ultimate cycle syncing guide. Although I do have an online course if you'd like to look at that too, but I love these books.
Yeah.
Maisie Hill, Period Power. This is an excellent book. The way she describes it. So whereas I go in the lunar phases, she sort of separates it by seasons. So like, the full moon ovulatory phase in here, she calls it your inner summer. So there's just lots of different perspectives and ways to look at it. But I really love this book a lot. There's so much good information in here. So I think with these 2 books, you'll be off to a wonderful start in your menstrual health journey.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, Period Power is the book that started it all for me. And I probably refer to that book like several times a week because it's just so, so
this
good.
Is covered in highlights.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And so you mentioned your course. That would also be a really great resource. Can you tell us about the courses that you offer?
Yes. So I offer, I have some online virtual workshops, just one-off workshops that I've done in the past that you can watch the recordings of. Those are on my website. Those are all, it's a hormone harmony series. So there's one on intuition, nutrition. There's one on fertility. But a lot of the stuff you will also find in the Cycle Magic course, which is an online course for what I like to call menstrual misfits. So people who feel like the conventional wellness community never really made sense for them, that it's full of that recycled advice that never really worked for you. This is a cycle syncing course that incorporates everything that we just talked about. So more of your intuition and sort of the psycho-spiritual aspect of health that goes into hormone balance. So it's a lot of fun. It's definitely a robust course. It's self-paced. However, I try to cater to all different types of learning styles. So what I did was create a suggested course schedule for you, so that if you're a person who wants to like have an actual calendar of events, that's in there for you too. But yeah, it's called Cycle Magic, and I am so excited to share it with you. And you can find that on my site at goodwitchkitchen.net.
Oh, wonderful. And what is your Instagram? People can find you there.
Instagram, yes, it's Good Witch Kitchen.
Good Witch Kitchen. I love that name, by the way. Awesome. Well, that all sounds wonderful. And I really encourage everyone to go check out one of your courses, but at the very least, go check out your Instagram because you also post really, really great information there.
Thank you. Thank you. I try to offer lots of education at different price points. And my social media is a place where you can get a lot of good stuff for free, and my podcast, The Lunar Body.
Yes. Oh, and you offer one-on-one coaching, correct?
Yes, I do. So that will be reopening in April. April. So now,
Yay!
so perfect. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can apply on my website. Also, if you are taking Cycle Magic, there is an option to add a few one-on-one sessions to that. So if you want to
Cool.
go through the course and have a little bit more hand-holding, I can work with you one-on-one there too.
Oh, very cool. I love that you offer things at various price points. I think that's so important.
Yeah, try to help everyone out, you know?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much, Kristen. This was such a great chat. And if you like this chat, make sure and follow her and also let us know that you liked it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.